My manager fired me after I refused to sleep with a client, so I exposed the company's darkest secret. It started with a dinner invitation I never wanted. My manager, Rebecca Martinez, pulled me aside late one Friday afternoon while I was finishing up quarterly reports. Her smile looked forced, almost predatory. "We've got a big opportunity, Ashley," she said, perching on the edge of my desk. "The client from Titan Global is in town tonight. He's expecting entertainment, and you're it." I blinked, genuinely confused. "You mean dinner and drinks? Business presentation? I can prepare talking points about our new software platform." Her smile tightened into something cold. "You know exactly what I mean, Ashley. Marcus Webb is very important to this company. If you want to grow here, if you want that promotion we discussed, you'll play along." My heart dropped into my stomach. I had worked for Sterling Communications for 3 years. I pulled extra hours, took on projects no one else wanted, and always delivered results. My client satisfaction scores were the highest in the department, but this crossed every line imaginable. "I'm not doing that," I said firmly, standing up from my chair. "That's not part of my job description." Her face shifted completely. The fake charm vanished, replaced by something ugly. "Suit yourself," she snapped, turning on her heel and walking away. I should have known that wasn't the end of it. Monday morning arrived, with a punch to the gut. I opened my company email to find a message waiting for me with the subject line, "Termination of employment, effective immediately." I read it 3 times before the words sank in. The reason listed was failure to fulfill client engagement duties and maintain professional relationships essential to company success. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. 3 years of dedication, countless successful projects, and they were firing me because I refused to prostitute myself for a client. Rebecca appeared at my desk within minutes, holding a cardboard box and wearing that same fake smile. "I'm sorry it came to this, Ashley, but client relationships are everything in this business." "This is illegal," I said, my voice barely controlled. "You can't fire someone for refusing sexual harassment." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Prove it. You have no witnesses, no documentation. It's your word against mine." As I packed my personal items, anger boiled inside me. But underneath the fury, a thought was forming. If they were doing this to me, how many other women had faced the same pressure? I wasn't going to leave quietly. Rebecca had just made the biggest mistake of her career. That evening, I reached out to a few former colleagues, women I trusted who had left Sterling Communications under mysterious circumstances. I kept my questions casual at first, but the responses were chilling. "Did you ever feel pressured into uncomfortable situations with clients?" I asked Jessica, who had quit 6 months earlier. The silence on the phone stretched too long. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you asking?" "Because I think we need to talk." We met at a coffee shop the next day. Jessica's hands trembled as she told me about the client dinner that had ended with her locked in a hotel room, fighting off a drunk executive while Rebecca waited in the lobby. "I reported it to HR," Jessica said. "They told me I was misunderstanding company culture and suggested I find a better fit elsewhere." By the end of the week, I had spoken to 5 former employees. 3 admitted to similar experiences. All had been pressured to keep quiet. All had left without explanation, afraid to speak up. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't just Rebecca acting alone. This was systematic. That night, I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every name, every detail. If Sterling Communications thought they could silence me, they were about to learn how wrong they were. I spent the next week diving deep into my old emails and documents. 3 years of employment had given me access to a lot of information, and I had always been meticulous about saving important communications. What I found made my stomach turn. Buried in email chains were references to client entertainment budgets that included hotel room charges and mysterious hospitality expenses. There were messages between managers discussing which female employees were team players and which ones needed attitude adjustments. One email from Rebecca to the regional director was particularly damning. "Sarah Mitchell is proving difficult regarding client engagement expectations, may need to reassess her commitment to company growth." I screenshot everything. Every email, every expense report, every performance review that suddenly made sense in this new context. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed more than just documentation. I needed someone with the power to expose this publicly. I researched investigative journalists who specialized in corporate scandals and workplace misconduct. One name kept coming up: Amanda Walsh from the Seattle Tribune. She had broken several major stories about Fortune 500 companies and workplace harassment. I composed a careful email, attaching select pieces of evidence and requesting a confidential meeting. Her response came within hours. "This looks serious. Let's talk." Meeting Amanda Walsh felt like stepping into a different world. Her office was cluttered with awards and framed newspaper clippings. She listened to my story with the focus of someone who had heard similar tales too many times. "The evidence you've provided is compelling," she said, reviewing my documentation. "But I'll need to verify everything independently. Are your former colleagues willing to go on record?" "Some of them, yes. They're tired of staying silent." Amanda leaned forward. "Ashley, if we pursue this story, it's going to get intense. Sterling Communications will fight back hard. They'll try to discredit you, attack your character, maybe even sue for defamation. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Jessica's trembling hands, about the other women who had been pressured into silence, about Rebecca's smug face when she fired me. "I'm ready," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, Amanda conducted interviews with former employees, reviewed financial records, and reached out to current Sterling Communications staff through back channels. What she uncovered was even worse than I had imagined. The pattern extended beyond just our branch. There were similar complaints at 3 other locations. Internal emails showed regional managers sharing strategies for client retention that made my skin crawl. "This isn't just workplace harassment," Amanda told me during one of our meetings. "This is organized, systematic exploitation, and it goes all the way to the top." While Amanda was building her investigation, I was dealing with the immediate fallout of unemployment. Sterling Communications had contested my unemployment benefits, claiming I was terminated for cause. Their HR department was clearly trying to make my life as difficult as possible, but I wasn't sitting idle. I had filed complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and contacted an employment attorney who specialized in wrongful termination cases. "Your case is incredibly strong," lawyer Jennifer Santos told me during our consultation. "The timeline alone is damning. They fired you immediately after you refused what amounts to sexual coercion. Plus, the documentation you've provided shows a pattern of retaliation." Jennifer agreed to represent me on a contingency basis, meaning she would only get paid if we won. That gave me confidence that she truly believed in the strength of my case. Meanwhile, Amanda's investigation was expanding. She had uncovered expense reports showing that Sterling Communications had been billing clients for entertainment services that were never properly documented. Some of these expenses coincided exactly with the dates when female employees had been pressured into client meetings. "I think we have enough for publication," Amanda told me. "But I want to give Sterling Communications a chance to respond. It's standard journalistic practice." The thought of them getting advance warning made me nervous, but I trusted Amanda's expertise. 3 days later, she called with an update that made my blood run cold. "They lawyered up immediately," Amanda said. "Sterling Communications hired one of the most expensive defense firms in the city. But here's the interesting part. They're not denying the allegations. They're trying to control the narrative." She read me excerpts from their legal response. Sterling Communications maintained that any inappropriate behavior was the action of individual employees, not company policy. They claimed to be shocked by the allegations and promised a thorough internal investigation. "Classic corporate damage control," Amanda explained. "They're getting ahead of the story and trying to limit their liability." But their response had an unintended consequence. Word was leaking inside the company that a major story was coming. Current employees were reaching out to Amanda through anonymous channels, sharing their own experiences and additional documentation. "I think you started an avalanche, Ashley," Amanda said. "Women are coming forward who were too scared to speak up before." One particularly devastating piece of evidence came from a current employee who had access to the executive calendar system. She provided screenshots showing a pattern of late-night client meetings that always involved the same female employees and always ended with hotel expenses. The story was becoming bigger than just my termination. It was exposing an entire culture of exploitation. Amanda set the publication date for the following Friday. Corporate scandal. Major communications firm accused of systematic employee exploitation. I spent that week in a state of nervous anticipation, knowing that once the story went live, there would be no going back. The story hit the internet at 6 a.m. on Friday morning. By 8 a.m., it was trending on social media. By noon, it had been picked up by national news outlets. Corporate giant Sterling Communications accused of pressuring female employees for client entertainment. Internal emails expose systematic harassment, read the headline across dozens of websites. My phone started ringing immediately. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers wanted to represent me. Former colleagues reached out with support and their own stories. But the most satisfying call came from Jessica, my former colleague who had been one of the first to speak up. "Ashley, you did it," she said, crying on the phone. "I've been watching the news all morning. They can't silence us anymore." Sterling Communications' stock price began dropping within hours of publication. Their social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. The hashtag Sterling scandal was trending nationwide. I watched from my apartment as the company that had tried to destroy me began crumbling under public scrutiny. But I felt no joy in their pain, only satisfaction that the truth was finally out. By the end of the day, Sterling Communications had released a statement promising immediate action and zero tolerance for misconduct. But their words felt hollow after years of systematic abuse. The real test would be whether they actually followed through with meaningful change. The public reaction was swift and devastating for Sterling Communications. Within 48 hours of the story breaking, 3 major clients had publicly severed their relationships with the company. Titan Global, ironically, the client whose demands had started this whole mess, issued a statement saying they were appalled by the allegations and were conducting their own internal review of their business practices. "We had no knowledge of these alleged activities and would never condone such behavior," their PR statement read. The hypocrisy was stunning, but at least they were distancing themselves. More importantly, current and former Sterling Communications employees were coming forward in droves. Amanda was working around the clock to verify new allegations and additional evidence. The company's response was predictably desperate. They hired a crisis management firm and began reaching out to employees with new contracts that included strict non-disclosure agreements and substantial financial incentives to stay quiet. "They're panicking," Jennifer Santos told me. "Companies don't offer hush money unless they know they're in serious legal trouble." The most shocking development came when Rebecca Martinez, my former manager, suddenly resigned to pursue other opportunities. No mention was made of the role she had played in the scandal, but everyone knew why she was leaving. Her departure felt like a small victory, but I knew the fight was far from over. While Sterling Communications was dealing with public relations disasters, I was building my legal case. Jennifer had filed a wrongful termination lawsuit seeking damages for lost wages, emotional distress, and punitive damages. "We're not just seeking compensation," Jennifer explained. "We want to send a message that this kind of behavior has serious consequences." Discovery in the lawsuit was revealing even more damaging evidence. Sterling Communications was required to turn over internal documents, and what they contained was explosive. There were training materials that essentially taught managers how to identify flexible female employees. There were performance evaluation forms that included coded language about client relationship skills. Most damning of all, there were internal memos discussing legal strategies for dealing with harassment complaints. "This shows premeditation," Jennifer said. "They knew what they were doing was wrong, and they planned how to cover it up." The evidence was so overwhelming that Sterling Communications lawyers approached us about settlement negotiations within just 3 weeks of filing. "They want this to go away," Jennifer told me. "They're offering a substantial settlement, but they want a non-disclosure agreement." I thought about Jessica and the other women who had suffered in silence for years. No NDA, I said firmly. If we settle, it has to be public. Other victims need to know they can speak up. Jennifer smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The settlement negotiations took place in a downtown law office that felt more like a battlefield than a conference room. Sterling Communications brought a team of 6 lawyers. Jennifer and I sat across from them with our carefully organized evidence. Their lead attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, tried to intimidate us from the very start. Ms. Ashley, you do understand that continuing this public campaign could result in significant legal consequences for you. Jennifer didn't let me answer. Are you threatening my client? Because that would be witness intimidation, which is a federal crime. The tone shifted quickly after that. Sterling Communications was in no position to make threats when the evidence against them was so overwhelming. Their settlement offer was substantial: $500,000 in damages, a formal public apology, an agreement to implement new workplace policies. But they still wanted a non-disclosure agreement. The money isn't enough, I said. I want policy changes that actually protect future employees. I want mandatory training for all managers. I want an independent ombudsman to handle harassment complaints. And I want regular public reporting on workplace culture metrics. Their lawyers looked uncomfortable. These demands would cost them far more than money. They would require genuine change. We'll need to discuss this with our clients, the lead attorney said. As we left the meeting, Jennifer was optimistic. They're going to accept your terms, she said. They have no choice. While settlement negotiations continued, the media story was taking on a life of its own. Amanda Walsh's investigation had expanded into a multi-part series examining workplace harassment across the entire communications industry. Sterling Communications was just the beginning. Amanda told me during one of our regular check-ins. I'm hearing from women at dozens of companies with similar stories. The industry response was mixed. Some companies were proactively reviewing their policies and implementing new protections for employees. Others were circling the wagons and hiring expensive PR firms to manage their reputations. But the most meaningful response came from individual women who were finding the courage to speak up about their own experiences. I received dozens of emails from current and former Sterling Communications employees thanking me for giving them a voice. One email particularly moved me. It was from a young woman named Maria, who had just started at Sterling Communications and was already feeling pressure from her manager to attend client dinners. Reading your story gave me the courage to say no, she wrote. I reported my manager to the new HR hotline they set up, and they actually took it seriously. Thank you for showing me that I don't have to stay silent. These messages reminded me why I had chosen to fight back instead of quietly accepting my termination. The money and legal victory were important, but knowing that other women wouldn't have to endure what I experienced was the real prize. Sterling Communications finally accepted our settlement terms 6 weeks after the initial story broke. The agreement included everything I had demanded: substantial financial compensation, public policy changes, and most importantly, no non-disclosure agreement. The public announcement was carefully worded, but the message was clear. Sterling Communications admitted to systematic failures in maintaining appropriate workplace standards and committed to comprehensive reforms to ensure employee safety and dignity. Rebecca Martinez was not just fired, she was banned from holding any management position within the company for 5 years. Several other executives were demoted or terminated. The regional director, who had overseen the culture of harassment, was quietly forced into early retirement. But the most satisfying part of the settlement was the establishment of an employee advocacy fund. Sterling Communications agreed to contribute $2 million annually to support workplace harassment victims across the industry, regardless of where they worked. You didn't just win your case, Jennifer told me as we signed the final documents. You've created a resource that will help thousands of other women. The day the settlement was announced, I received a call from an unexpected source, Marcus Webb, the Titan Global client whose demands had started this entire ordeal. I owe you an apology, he said. I had no idea that my expectations were causing this kind of pressure for employees. I've spoken with my own company's leadership, and we're implementing new policies to prevent this from happening again. It wasn't enough to undo the damage he had caused, but it was a start. 6 months after my termination, I found myself in a position I never could have imagined. The Employee Advocacy Fund, that was part of my settlement, had grown into a full-time organization, and I was invited to serve as its first director. "You've become the face of this movement," the board chair told me during the interview. "Women across the country know your story and trust your judgment. We need someone who understands the issue from personal experience." Taking the position felt like completing a circle. I would be using my experience to help other women who found themselves in situations similar to what I had faced. The work was challenging but incredibly rewarding. We provided legal support, financial assistance, and career counseling to women who were fighting workplace harassment. We also worked with companies to develop better policies and training programs. One of our first major successes was helping a group of women at a tech startup who were facing pressure similar to what I had experienced. Their CEO had been requiring female employees to accompany him to networking events that were really just excuses for inappropriate behavior. With our support, they were able to document the pattern, file complaints with appropriate authorities, and ultimately force the CEO's resignation. The company implemented new leadership and became a model for respectful workplace culture. "This is what victory looks like," I told the women as we celebrated their success. "Not just individual justice, but systematic change." A year after the Sterling Communications scandal broke, Amanda Walsh called with news that made my blood boil all over again. "Rebecca Martinez got hired," she said. "Some small communications firm in Phoenix picked her up as a senior manager." I couldn't believe it. After everything that had been exposed, after all the evidence of her role in systematic harassment, someone had still given her a management position where she could potentially harm other women. "We need to warn them," I said immediately. Amanda had already been working on that. "I've reached out to local reporters in Phoenix. They're investigating her new company and making sure they understand exactly who they hired." This situation highlighted one of the ongoing challenges in fighting workplace harassment. Even when perpetrators are exposed and face consequences, they often just move to new companies where their history isn't known. Through the Employee Advocacy Fund, we began developing a database of documented harassers that we could share with companies conducting background checks. It was controversial. Some argued it was unfair to permanently brand someone for past behavior, but I believed women's safety was more important than protecting perpetrators' career prospects. "People need to understand that actions have consequences," I told a reporter who was writing about our database. "If you use your position of power to exploit and harm others, you forfeit your right to hold similar positions in the future." The Rebecca Martinez hire turned out to be short-lived. Once the Phoenix company learned about her history, they terminated her employment within 2 weeks. The second anniversary of my termination from Sterling Communications was marked by a milestone I never could have anticipated: the passage of federal legislation strengthening workplace harassment protections. The Employee Safety and Dignity Act included many provisions that had grown out of our advocacy work. Companies were now required to maintain public records of harassment complaints and resolutions. Executives who covered up harassment could face personal criminal liability, and victims were guaranteed legal representation through a federally funded program. I was invited to attend the bill signing ceremony at the White House. Standing in the Oval Office, watching the president sign legislation that would protect millions of workers felt surreal. This law exists because brave women like Ashley Williamsel were willing to speak truth to power, the president said during the ceremony. When faced with an impossible choice between silence and justice, she chose justice, not just for herself, but for countless others. After the ceremony, I was approached by a young woman who worked as a White House intern. "I just wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "I was sexually harassed at my previous job, and reading about your case gave me the courage to report it." My company was investigated, and 3 managers were fired. These moments reminded me why the fight had been worth it. Every woman who felt empowered to speak up, every company that changed its policies, every perpetrator who faced consequences, they were all part of a larger transformation in how society treated workplace harassment. 3 years after the scandal, I received an invitation that brought the story full circle. Sterling Communications wanted me to speak at their annual company meeting. The request came from their new CEO, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who had been brought in to rebuild the company's culture and reputation. "We want our employees to hear directly from you about the importance of maintaining respectful workplace standards," she wrote. "Your story has become part of our required training for all new hires, but hearing it from you personally would be incredibly powerful." I was hesitant at first. The idea of returning to the company that had tried to destroy me felt emotionally difficult, but I realized it could be an opportunity to measure how much had really changed. The Sterling Communications headquarters looked exactly the same from the outside, but the atmosphere inside was completely different. Gone were the closed-door meetings and whispered conversations. The company had implemented an open-door policy, regular culture surveys, and mandatory harassment prevention training. Most importantly, they had hired women into leadership positions throughout the organization. The management team was now 60% female, and they had established mentorship programs to support women's career advancement. We had to completely rebuild our culture from the ground up. Patricia told me before my presentation, "Your case forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about who we had become as an organization." Standing at the podium in the Sterling Communications auditorium, looking out at hundreds of employees, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Some of these people had watched silently while I was harassed and fired. Others were new hires who only knew the company's reformed version. 3 years ago, I was fired from this company for refusing to compromise my values, I began. I was told that client relationships were more important than employee dignity. I was told that my career would be over if I didn't play along with expectations that no employee should ever face. The room was completely silent. I could see some older employees shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But I learned something important from that experience. Silence enables abuse. When we stay quiet about wrongdoing, we become complicit in it. When we speak up, we create the possibility for change. I talked about the investigation, the legal battle, and the systematic reforms that had followed. But I also emphasized that cultural change required ongoing vigilance. "Policies and training programs are important," I said, "but real change happens when every single person in an organization commits to treating their colleagues with respect and dignity. It happens when you speak up if you see something wrong. It happens when you support colleagues who find the courage to report misconduct." The standing ovation felt genuine, but the real test would be whether the company maintained its commitment to reform when public attention eventually moved to other issues. After my presentation at Sterling Communications, I was approached by several employees who wanted to share their own experiences. The stories I heard were encouraging. People felt safe reporting concerns, managers were being held accountable for their behavior, and the company culture had genuinely transformed. But one conversation stayed with me. A young woman named Kate pulled me aside and whispered, "I'm dealing with something similar at my previous job. My old manager is still out there, probably doing the same things to other women. What can I do?" This highlighted an ongoing challenge. While we had succeeded in reforming Sterling Communications, there were thousands of other companies where similar abuses might be occurring. The harassers we had exposed had often just moved to new positions where they could continue their behavior. Through the Employee Advocacy Fund, we had been tracking these patterns and trying to share information with potential victims, but our reach was limited. That evening, I had dinner with Amanda Walsh, who had continued investigating workplace harassment across various industries. "I've been thinking about your speech today," she said. "What if we created a national database where women could confidentially report workplace harassment and check whether potential employers have histories of problems?" It was an ambitious idea, But the technology existed to make it work. We could create a platform where women could share their experiences safely while providing warnings to others who might encounter the same perpetrators. Developing the National Harassment Database took 8 months of intensive work. We had to navigate complex legal issues around privacy and defamation while ensuring the platform would actually protect vulnerable women. The final system allowed users to submit detailed reports about workplace harassment, which were then verified by our legal team before being included in the database. Companies could also voluntarily submit their own harassment complaint data to demonstrate transparency. We launched the platform, called Safe Workplace, with reports from over 500 women who had experienced harassment at companies across the country. The response was overwhelming. Within the first month, we had 10,000 new user registrations and reports from women at companies in every major industry. We also discovered several patterns of serial harassers who had moved between companies, leaving trails of victims in their wake. One particularly disturbing case involved a marketing executive who had been fired from 3 different companies for sexual harassment, but continued getting hired at new firms because his previous employers hadn't disclosed the reasons for his termination. This is exactly why we needed this database, I told Amanda during one of our regular check-ins. Women were being victimized repeatedly because information wasn't being shared. The platform also had an unexpected benefit. Companies began using it to screen potential hires and demonstrate their commitment to workplace safety. Several major corporations announced they would only do business with suppliers who participated in the Safe Workplace Transparency Program. The success of Safe Workplace attracted national attention and, inevitably, backlash from those who felt threatened by accountability. We faced legal challenges from companies claiming the database was defamatory and harassment from individuals who had been named in reports. The most serious challenge came when a group of male executives filed a class action lawsuit claiming the database violated their civil rights by creating a blacklist that prevented them from finding employment. This is exactly the kind of legal intimidation we expected, Jennifer Santos told me as we prepared our defense. They're trying to scare other women from coming forward. The lawsuit received significant media coverage, with opinion pieces both supporting and criticizing our approach. Some argued that we were creating a system of trial by accusation that denied due process. Others pointed out that traditional legal and corporate systems had failed to protect women for decades. I found myself testifying before Congress about the need for better harassment prevention systems. The current approach isn't working, I told the House Committee on Education and Labor. Companies continue to hire known harassers because information isn't being shared. Women continue to face retaliation for speaking up because there are no real consequences for perpetrators. The legal challenges were ultimately unsuccessful. Courts ruled that as long as our reports were factually accurate and had been properly verified, sharing information about workplace harassment served a legitimate public interest. 5 years after my termination from Sterling Communications, I was invited to give the keynote address at the National Conference on Workplace Equality. The audience included HR professionals, employment lawyers, and advocacy groups from across the country. Looking out at the crowd, I reflected on how much had changed since that Friday afternoon when Rebecca Martinez tried to force me into entertaining a client. 5 years ago, I was just another woman facing an impossible choice, I began. I could compromise my values to keep my job, or I could stand up for myself and face the consequences. At the time, it felt like a personal decision that would only affect me. I talked about how speaking up had led to systematic changes that had protected thousands of other women. New laws, reformed corporate policies, and cultural shifts that made harassment less common and less tolerated. But the most important change isn't in our laws or policies, I continued. It's in our collective understanding that workplace harassment isn't just an individual problem. It's a symptom of systems that allow powerful people to exploit those with less power. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, but the moment that meant the most to me came afterward. A young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "I'm starting my first job next week," she said. Because of everything you've done, I'll be walking into a workplace that's safer than it would have been 5 years ago. Thank you for making it possible for women like me to have careers without compromising our dignity. The Employee Advocacy Fund had grown into a national organization with offices in 12 cities and a staff of over 100 people. We were handling thousands of cases annually and had helped secure millions of dollars in settlements for harassment victims. But our impact went beyond individual cases. We had become a resource for companies that genuinely wanted to improve their workplace cultures. We offered training programs, policy development assistance, and ongoing monitoring services. One of our most successful programs paired executives from companies with good track records with leadership at organizations that were struggling with harassment issues. The peer mentoring approach had helped dozens of companies transform their cultures. What you've built is remarkable, Patricia Rodriguez from Sterling Communications told me during one of our quarterly check-ins. You took a personal trauma and turned it into a force for systematic change. Sterling Communications had become one of our partner organizations, sharing their transformation story with other companies and contributing financial support to our programs. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that had tried to destroy me for refusing to be exploited had become one of our strongest allies in the fight against workplace harassment. Redemption is possible, I told Patricia, but it requires acknowledging past mistakes and committing to do better. Sterling Communications has done that work. As I approached the 6th anniversary of my termination, I received news that felt like the final piece of vindication. Rebecca Martinez had been arrested for attempted sexual assault. The charges were unrelated to her time at Sterling Communications, but they vindicated everyone who had questioned why she continued to receive management positions after her role in systematic harassment was exposed. She never stopped being a predator, Amanda Walsh told me when she called with the news. She just got better at hiding it. The arrest reopened media attention on the Sterling Communications case and highlighted the importance of the Safe Workplace database. If her subsequent employers had checked our system, they would have seen the pattern of behavior that eventually led to criminal charges. I felt no satisfaction in Rebecca's downfall. Her victims deserved better than having to endure harm before justice was served. But her arrest did reinforce my belief that people who abuse their power rarely stop unless they face serious consequences. The Employee Advocacy Fund issued a statement emphasizing that workplace harassment often escalates to criminal behavior when left unchecked. We used the moment to advocate for stronger background check requirements and mandatory reporting of harassment incidents. This case demonstrates why accountability matters, I told reporters. When we allow harassers to move between organizations without consequences, we're enabling them to harm more people. 7 years after that Friday afternoon, when Rebecca Martinez tried to coerce me into entertaining a client, I stood before the Supreme Court of the United States. The Employee Safety and Dignity Act was being challenged by a coalition of business groups who claimed it imposed unreasonable burdens on employers. As I watched the justices question the lawyers on both sides, I thought about all the women who had found the courage to speak up because they knew someone was listening. I thought about the companies that had voluntarily reformed their cultures because they understood that respect and dignity weren't burdens. They were basic requirements for a just society. The court ultimately upheld the law by a 7-2 majority, ruling that protecting workers from harassment served compelling government interests that justified the regulatory requirements. Walking down the Supreme Court steps after the decision, I was surrounded by reporters asking how it felt to have won such a significant victory. "This isn't my victory," I said. "It belongs to every woman who refused to stay silent, every company that chose to do better, and every person who believed that workplace dignity was worth fighting for." That evening, I received a text message from Jessica, my former colleague who had been one of the first to share her story. "We did it," she wrote. "We actually changed the world." Looking back, the path from that humiliating termination to systematic reform hadn't been easy. There had been legal battles, personal attacks, and moments when I questioned whether the fight was worth it. But as I read messages from women who felt safer at work, from companies that had transformed their cultures, and from young people entering the workforce with expectations of dignity and respect, I knew the answer. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you could do for other